Hey everybody, welcome back to the collective. We have another awesome show coming up for you today. I we just got finished. I don't know if we're finished yet. But I was just
Oh,
being
we're not
admonished.
finished.
I was being admonished.
You have
For,
been formally admonished.
do I need to sign anything? Like, is there paperwork I need to do?
I think you mentally signed it in your prefrontal cortex about 2 minutes ago.
You're right. I 100% did. There was a
Carved like
signature.
a
There was
wood carving tool.
with the
Oh,
old
oh
oh
yeah,
yeah
the
yeah
old.
the old thing with the stuff and the other
I,
things. Anyway,
you know what? Just on that point,
yeah.
I used to when I was in, I guess it would have been junior high. I went through a little phase there where I had my old school with the little tip on it that you could burn things into
Oh,
wood.
yeah, yeah, the
I had
wood
one of
burning,
those old school, and
nice.
then I started like making leather belts.
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah, it was a thing. I went through a phase where
that's
I was
cool.
crafty.
Well, we're gonna talk about that anyway, but before
Oh
we
yeah,
talk about that, what I wanted to make sure everybody does is that they go and like the, page, like the thing, subscribe to us, hit the notification bell, that way you can be notified every time we go live, like we are right now, and, yeah, make sure that y'all do that so that you can join us every day as we carry on. But the thing that
so
we're
I
gonna
got a question for
okay,
you.
you got a question?
You just threw that up there, and here's what I thought. I wonder if that's actually making a difference.
Hmm.
I don't know. So have you correlated since you started using that? Have you seen a bump in like little bell dings or whatever?
Well, I've only used it twice. This will be my
Okay,
3rd attempt, so there's not really enough to
fair enough.
make some sort of
Correct.
assessment on that one, but
Correct.
I am tracking. I'm
Okay.
watching. It is happening. The one thing I wanna talk about today, though, is who were you when you were 11?
Man, that is how long ago was that? That's so long I can't even do the math.
The reason we want to talk about this, first off, we were talking in the green room about this and how, we've changed. We're no longer the same people. Or the same people, but we've changed our outlooks on a number of things. But as you were just saying, you had a wood carving kit or a wood burning
Mhm.
kit, I should say.
Mhm.
Were you, what kind of person were you when you were 11?
Well, I was the person of 49 years ago.
Slightly different.
Whatever that was.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. Never really been asked it before, never really thought about it before. So here's my first thoughts. We just moved over from England,
Mm,
and I was moved over when I was 10, just about to turn 11 when we moved to Grand Cache, Alberta. And so who was I? I was a transplant, man. I was a uh, I I was a Brit,
hmm
and it wasn't well received, particularly
In rural
particularly
Alberta.
when you're a scrawny kid with a bit of attitude. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I ran around and I did my thing, and I was trying to, not trying to, I was um, becoming part of the Canadian society all around me, the fabric of
hmm
Canada, and it wasn't overly difficult. But man, in the town that I grew up in, you were either Canadian, and if you were a Canadian, you were mostly Newfie or Novi, so you were an
hmm
East Coaster, and they show up with a certain amount of grit, or you were Welsh, Scottish, or English, and they all showed up with a certain amount of grit.
Yep.
And so it was game on. It was a gritty town where everyone was developing grit, whether
Mm,
you liked it or not. And I just happened to like it. So it was a tough town with a tough attitude, coal mining attitude.
yeah.
And that's how I was raised from 11 until, well, I joined the army, was surrounded by gritty people who just didn't put up with nonsense. And, if you wanted to recreate, you didn't jump on your jet ski. You jumped in your boots and started walking.
Figured it out. Yeah.
And if you wanted a distraction, your distraction was put on your boots
hmm
and go walk out in the bush. And
hmm
so there wasn't any yellow umbrella nonsense back then where just follow the yellow umbrella, everything will be taken care of. Here you go. Next year, we'll feed you pablum. There was none of that. It was you're on your own, to your left to your own devices to
hmm
figure out the world around you. At least that's what it was for me. My dad was busy at work. My mom was being a housewife. And back in the day, that was, I don't want to say it was a full-time job, but people thought it was. And so, I was left to my own devices, man. And that was just totally normal back then.
What do you think the biggest transition issue was for you? Coming directly from England to Canada, what was the stickiest part to get over or to get through?
My accent. So I had a really, you wouldn't know it now.
I've heard pieces of it come out every
Right.
once in a while, but
Yeah, try
only
not
when you're
to let it
talking about
out
Irish.
too much. But where I was born, Yorkshire, Barnsley, Yorkshire, and Yorkshire is pretty well known for its, I'd call it a harsh accent. It's really broad. E by gum, lad. That's actually a sentence. and translated, that means wow. And so, e by gum, lad.
Oh, wow.
So, that's how I showed up with this alien language, and it was not received well. And so, and not only was my accent hard to understand as a sort of broad Yorkshireman at the time, but I had a big set of ears on me, almost like royal family big, and I was a short ass. So my nickname in high school, actually, as I was growing up, was Titch, Titch, which is a almost a slanderous term meaning short ass. What's up, Titch? Hey, Titch. And it was my buddies that called me Titch.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a colloquialism. It's an old English word. Have you ever heard Titch before?
I have never heard that before.
Right. Well,
no.
presto changer, you just learned something.
I did.
And so, e by gum, lad, you're a titch. So, I showed up with sort of some things that were out of my control. I spoke a certain way. I had a certain set of ears. I had a bit of attitude. I was a short ass. And, that's what defined me in junior and senior high. And guess what? When someone starts hassling you about you being a short ass and blah, 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 or flicking your ears as an example, the guy behind me was a total jerk. Flick my ears. I'm like, oh, one day.
It's it's hard growing up, man. It's hard.
Oh, it is.
10,
It
11,
is.
12. It's probably some of the hardest years. You're confused. You think you know what's happening, but you don't. And you look around and you're like, what is going on? Like, what is even going on?
There isn't even a framework. It's so like blank slate at that age. At least it was for me coming over from England.
Yeah.
As a not Canadian. And so
it was for me as a Canadian. So
yeah, right. But there was nothing back then. I mean, literally. At least nowadays there's books or there's the internet or, at least people communicate a little bit better than they did back then. Literally nobody talked back then.
Yeah.
And so it was a blank slate with no solutions, nowhere to turn, no one giving you advice, no pearls of wisdom, no interwebs, no books, no nothing. Not even good commercials. Even the food was bad.
Was this like mid-70s?
This was I was born in 63, so it would have been around 74-ish.
Yeah. Yeah. So there wasn't much going on in rural Alberta in the 70s.
Going on. There was my buck hunting knife and my Ruger 1022 that was preceded by a pellet gun. That was preceded by a BB gun. That was preceded by a pair of wet running shoes that I'd go hike in. Yep. And so that was the evolution. Show up, get my ears flicked, go out in the bush, BB, pellet, 22, army.
Yeah. Those Ruger 1022s are nice. And
dude, I've still got it.
They're a beautiful little rifle. I finally got one. We had one down at the ranch for forever, and it's still down there, and it still shoots great. But I never had one of my own. And now I do, and I'm very happy about it. I'm gonna teach
I bought that 45 years ago, and so like it was a big deal to me because because it had a rotary 10-round clip.
Yeah, those are
And
fantastic.
oh, dude, like I was on I had a break action pellet gun.
Yep. I
And
still got one of those too, actually.
yeah, got it in the garage.
Yeah.
And so I had a break action pellet gun. And so, it's a one shot at a time sort of deal. And
Mhm.
so I'd be hunting rabbit, goony birds, and squirrels. Kids, do not be me. I say it a lot. I hope I'm forming a trend. So at that age, what I would do to hunt, or in winter storm,
Morning.
is this is crazy. What I would do, the pellets used to come in the little round tin.
Mhm.
I'd grab about 15 of them, stick them in my mouth,
Mhm.
tuck them right in my gum, and I'd go hunting. And the first one I'd crack, it'd be like this.
Yeah.
Crack.
I was picturing you.
Reloading from my gum.
I was just picturing you moving around with your tongue and get one ready, like move it right up
Dude,
to the
I
top of your teeth.
totally was.
Bang,
Precisely
bang.
what I was doing.
Yeah.
Speed loading from my
Speed
gum.
loader comes with
Hey,
lead
hey, can I
pellets.
hang on? Can I suck on some lead for some?
Yes, kids, don't do that.
Don't be me.
Adults, just don't do
There's
that.
a lot of things that I've done that are questionable.
Yeah, I remember seeing out when I was 11. It would have been 93.
Oh, right.
And we were all over southern Alberta growing up. So I was, Lethbridge, Cowley, Pitch Creek, Claresholm,
Oh, yeah,
Fort
yeah.
McLeod, like all over that area, Calgary.
Yeah. Oh, well.
By this point, though, at 11, we were in Calgary, and I was at a private school.
Oh, which one?
It's called the Calgary Jewish Academy.
Okay. I don't know if
And
I've seen it.
it's in the northwest, just on
Okay.
the other side of Rocky Mountain Hospital, Rocky Mountain Hospital.
The Rocky. Yeah. Yeah.
Literally across the street from that.
Right.
And there's the run we used to do in that school every year. It was kind of like a BFT, but it was for the school. And every year you had
So
to run.
what year was that? 94?
93.
Okay.
Yeah, 93, 94.
All
So,
right.
I was there. And I was asking you about transition because I wanted to know. I went from, country schools and public schools into a private system, learning about my Jewish ancestry, which I had never even heard about or talked about up until the time that I'd gotten there. And I was just like, I don't know any of these people. I don't know why people are doing this stuff. I was learning 4 languages. Like it was, oh yeah, we're Hebrew, Yiddish, French, and of course English, in grade 3 or 4.
Oh, yeah, right.
So you're learning all kinds of grammar from
That's
multiple languages at the same time. It was a lot. And it was a full curriculum. So we had to do all the other curriculum as well. And then there was Jewish social studies on top of that. And then there was it was quite a bit.
A lot.
When I left that school after grade 7, I went into the public system and I started just acing tests.
Oh, yeah. It would have been so easy.
I was like a year and a half ahead of everybody.
Yeah.
Crazy. But I was still that country boy, that little kid that used to just go wandering out into the grass and let's go over there. The funny thing is at this age, my school was on the other side of the city. So I lived just north of downtown in the Crescent Heights area.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to take the first bus in the morning, the 0600 bus, to drive an hour plus along the bus routes. I'd bus to a train to a bus to the school. And that was every day and every day back. And it was an hour and a half, depending on the bus schedule and how it all worked.
Right.
On my own.
Right.
Just, a little 10-year-old kid taking the bus all the way across the city.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it was. And it was totally fun.
Well, it's the way it had to be, apparently, because if it could have been any other way, you would have been either levitating or transporter beaming or whatever. I mean, if there was another option, you would have been taking it, but that was the option of the day and you were making it work. And that's just the way it has to be.
And I think that's part of growing up too, is that there's a point. I heard this little blurb on Instagram at one point that, as you go through puberty, as you get into that range, 12, 13, 14, there is a desire for death, and not in terms of like you want to die, but your childhood is metaphorically dying and your adulthood is starting to grow. And so that's why that age period is so confusing, because you're not so much losing things, but you're evolving past certain things and gaining new things. And then that's why it's such a difficult time psychologically, because you're just, again, like you said, there's no framework. It's just kind of chaos. What do you
Yeah,
think on
but
that?
so here was my first thought. I'd never really considered it before. Could be a abstract idea, could have no bearing in reality, but this is what popped into my head. I think the difference between me growing up at 11 and an 11-year-old today is they never grow up.
Hmm.
So at 11, I was already out hunting with my BB gun.
Yeah.
And then by the age of 12, 13, and 14, by 14, I was out by myself on the regular with my Ruger 1022,
Yeah.
quite comfortable with a box of matches and a baked apple
Yeah.
in the dark, in grizzly country,
Hmm.
in etc.
Yeah.
With no comms, no nothing, no fallback plan per se, just me growing up.
Yeah.
And so that's wildly different, having to solve all of those problems, having to, it's freaking January in Grand Cache, man. Unless you've been there, it's tough terrain
Yep.
and it's a tough winter.
Yep.
And so, and funnily enough, I was just reading, as an aside, uh, reading The Mission, The Men, and Me with Pete Labor this morning.
Hmm.
And he was talking about how they wanted to figure out how to move in the mountains more effectively. This is kind of like pre 911 sort of thing. And um, they went down to an area in Montana called the Bob. And
Mm.
apparently it's rough terrain, and they were learning how to move through the mountains. And as I was reading that, I was thinking, I was doing that at 12.
Yeah.
And the as not to take anything away from Pete Labor, because he's a freaking superhero, and I'm not throwing any this is no negative slur on anything in respect to the book. But as he was talking about how they were mission planning to go into the Bob, it was kind of it's not that he was making a big deal out of it, but the focus was on how to plan to get a 40-pound pack and move through this terrain at a certain speed, and et cetera, et cetera. And they got the pro tip of the day when they were having their steak dinner kind of the night before from a local who said, you know what, boys, you might need snowshoes while you're up there, and just little things like that. And I was like, really? You didn't know that? Boys, I learned that at 12. And so, it depends on how you're raised.
Yeah.
And I was raised in freaking John J. Rambo country.
Yeah.
And so, not taking anything. I know nothing compared to Pete Labor. Now that I've established that I'm an idiot and he's a superstar, I was already doing that at 12. And that's just what I was used to.
Yeah.
And so, as I grew up, I had to grow up fast, man, because there's no luxuries out there in the boonies.
Hmm.
There's no comfort out there except the comfort that you create yourself. And there's no ducking problems. You got to face them head on.
Yep.
I mean, if you can't feel your hands, do something about it.
Yeah.
And so, I had to learn a lot when I was a kid, but nowadays, kids sometimes have to learn nothing except hit the reset button on the video game that they're playing because, they want to play it again or whatever.
Yeah.
And food is delivered to them, right to their room. Are you okay, little Johnny? How's the game going? Brought you your mac and cheese. And they're living in a little bubble, loads of comfort, no lessons being learned other than the lessons that maybe a video game is teaching them. And then when they leave home or when they leave high school where they've been wrapped in that silver foil bubble, now they're out in the big bad world and they're still 11 years old.
Yep. Yep. That is a serious challenge. And I you reminded me of a story. When I would have been, I think, 6 at this point. It's funny because I have a hard time remembering the ages of certain places because we moved around a bunch of times. So I'm thinking of like places rather than
Oh, yeah,
ages.
right. Yeah, makes sense.
And we used to live in this place called Wilson Siding, and it was 9 kilometers outside of Lethbridge, like
Mm.
in the middle of toward like eastward towards
Oh,
Saskatchewan.
eastward. Yeah, right.
And
There's nothing out there
nothing, right? So there was our
except
house.
wind.
Yeah, so there was our house, our next door neighbor's house. Across the gravel road was 2 grain elevators and a railroad track
Right.
and a highway,
Right.
and that was it. Just nothing.
Yeah.
And
So what did you do with your time?
we played in
Played.
the we played in the we just went out in the field, man. We
Yeah.
found stuff, and whenever there was a train just sitting there on the other side, we played on the train, and we played
Yeah,
in the train. We
for
played. It
sure.
was super dangerous. Like we should not be playing in grain elevators or live
Correct.
trains, but that's
Yeah.
all there was, man.
That's all there is.
At one point, we were walking along way out in the middle, like we were kilometers away from the house, and my brothers, we were crossing this little creek, and it had been an unusually wet fall, so there was a lot of snow, and it was now winter, but there was a lot of snow, and we knew there was a creek there. My brother knew there was a creek there. He went to step on the ice and then step over, and as he stepped over, we heard a big
Right.
and we're like, oh no. Now I'm on the other side of the water. He's on the house side. And the only way to get either around is to go to the highway, which we were not allowed to go onto. And I would have, like I said, probably 6 or 7 at this point. And he's like, yeah, no worries. Just give me your hand. Put your hand out. I'll get you across. And so I put my leg on the ice. I gave him my hand. And as I stepped through, right down to
Did you go completely submerged?
not quite. It
Oh, come on.
one leg stayed up, one leg did not. And so I went straight down one all the way to the hip. And I came out and it was the middle of winter. It was minus
Sure.
20 something, minus 30.
So what
It
did
was
you
cold.
do?
Well, he pulled me out. We kind of sat there for like a second going, okay. And he said, wait here, and laid me in the snow, packed the wet leg with snow. So I had like a good 3 or 4 inches of snow on the leg itself. And he said, I'll be back.
Oh,
And he
that's
took
not a
off.
great decision.
And so he would have been 9.
Sure. I'm not throwing him under the, I'm not throwing him in the frozen water.
So
I'm just saying not a great decision.
And he ran off. And I just sat there. I was like, okay.
Dying.
Yeah, like this is cool. And then I don't know how long it took, but he eventually came running back with his little red wagon and loaded me up and dragged me home the whole way. And it was probably a good 3 or 4 kilometers. Like it was a long.
Right.
And he had told my mom what had happened. And when I got there was hot chocolate made, and it was sitting by the fire, like, and I put my leg up by the fire. It was frozen, but it like I didn't lose any toes. It was just kind of, it all happened and it worked. But
looking back on that, how would you have done it differently?
I would have started moving.
Yeah,
like just jogging. Let's go. Got to get the
let's go back to the house.
Just like go as hard as I could. Smart call on the snow though.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because it wasn't until later
for about like 10 seconds.
Yeah,
it was the right decision.
Layer, right?
10 seconds, check. We've dried up some of the water. We've absorbed some of that moisture. Now let's get you moving.
Yeah, and that would have been the smart call. But again, when you're out in the country, you just gotta go. Like as a 9-year-old boy, I don't think I would have been able to make that call, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm not throwing him under the bus.
For sure.
I'm sure he was making the best decision that he could at the time based on the limited information that he had, which was next to nothing, because that was a terrible decision.
And but the point is that when you're out when you're growing up in the country, when you're growing up out in the middle of nowhere, especially before the internet, before cell phones, before all these other things, you just had to make do.
Oh, you had
to
for
make a choice, make a decision,
figure it out.
Go. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of people don't get nowadays, is just make a decision and then act upon that decision. See what happens.
Well, not just see what happens, modify in the real time.
Yeah.
Make a decision, modify.
Yeah. It's a weird world too when you're that young, when you're 11, 12, and you start making decisions at that point too that are that have consequences, that have serious consequences, right?
Yeah.
And it can be a hard lesson very quickly. What was Let me ask you this then. What was the easiest thing to slide into when you came over?
Kicking everyone's ass at soccer.
Did you I could just see the PE teacher throwing the soccer ball out and you going, yes.
Here's the best part. The PE teacher was my favorite teacher because he was also from England. And he was a slight built guy. I'd put him at about 150 pounds. He was athletic. And the best part about this dude, he had an all white strip, like an all white kit when we'd go and play soccer. And all white was my team, Leeds United. Yes,
Nice.
Leeds United. And so he was a cool guy because he played soccer well. And he was actually, I was on his indoor soccer team. And I played outdoor soccer, of course. And so I was either playing indoor or outdoor. He was a good PE teacher and he was into soccer. And so I slipped into that. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now, of course, the problem with that is you're the small kid with the big ears and a weird accent, and you play soccer well, and that doesn't look good for the much bigger Canadian who only plays hockey, and now he's stuck playing soccer with some little kid who's got attitude. Can you imagine how my ears were getting flicked?
Oh yeah, not just attitude, but skill.
Oh, dude, I could run circles around those chumps. I mean, just like they could skate circles around me on the ice. Yeah. So, but it's hard when it's coming from a little goof like me, and I'm like chirp chirp chirp.
Yeah, it's man, it's hard to explain country towns too because there's so much. It's not quite animosity, but there's just like this competitive drive.
Oh, there's an edge.
Everybody.
Yeah, and you know what? Why? Okay, let me ask you why you think that is.
Having never really thought about it, but thinking about it now, my first thought would probably be the fact that there's nothing to do except for engage physically, and like being able to discuss stuff was not an option.
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
That's my
you know what I think it is, and I haven't thought about it until I asked the question. I was curious as to how off base I was or whatever. I think it's this, that in small little towns like that are isolated, which Grand Cache was, of course.
Yep.
The town itself was about 3,500 people, and everyone's all up in everyone's business because there's no other business but your neighbor's business. There's no other business but the guy across the town's business, and everyone knows what's going on, and every kid knows what's going on. You're all up in everyone's face all the time if you're in town, and the only way to get away from it is to go out in the bush. So the moment you come in from the bush, now everyone's up in your business.
You're back
and it's an electron microscope all the time. Everyone's observing because it's so small. And then the cliques start isolating, the jocks, the nerds, the this, the that, all of the Breakfast Club stereotypes. The movie is what I'm referring to.
For sure.
And it's easy to identify who's who in the zoo in each particular clique, and each clique back then in the small mountain towns of Alberta, everyone was defending their clique, and cliques were clashing. And, it was just this whole dramatic soap opera. It's crazy to look back on it, but it's easy to understand, I think, how it can really manifest itself into all of the nonsense that rural Alberta could create at the times.
You know what it really reminds me of, actually, is siblings. Right?
Yeah.
When you got an older brother or a younger sister, like you will bicker and fight.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And just you'll be at each other's throats all day long, and it's just because you can't escape. Like there's nowhere to go. You can't get away from them.
There's just the hassle in front of you all the time.
Exactly. So I think you're correct in that. Is like if you have nowhere else to go, then there's nothing to do but either solve the problem or create another problem.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about Grand Cache, which created like its own unique microcosm, is that the town itself, when it was developed for the specific purpose of keeping the town contained,
Mhm.
and all of the infrastructure layout and et cetera. It was all sort of designed for the mine, for the coal
Yeah. I
mine.
was gonna say
And
it's Coal
so,
Town.
yeah, and the boundaries of the town, it was like you could draw them on a piece of paper and no one crossed the boundaries.
Mhm.
The only people that stepped out of town boundaries were people who were going out into the bush. And so you're all trapped in this goofy little petri dish of cliques and ruralism. And well, man, I think that a good social engineer or a good social engineering scientist who has a keen eye could probably turn that little town into a full blown 300 novel episode of. So let's talk about rural Alberta in the mid 70s.
I mean, it's kind of funny that I just finished a podcast, it was talking about the coal towns in the Appalachians back in 1919,
Okay,
1920,
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of area. And their fight against the companies and the fight. They was talking about the rebellion against even the state and the federal government. Like it was a big deal back then. Anyway, um, it's kind of hilarious though that they've become company towns and
Yeah.
everybody is in that town. They work for the company, they work for the store, they work for so everybody's doing kind of the same thing. And if to get out of that town like that, it becomes this dream of just like, I'm gonna make it somewhere else one
Right.
day.
I got to get out of this,
Exactly.
whatever this is, because I
Yeah.
don't know, because I've never left this.
Exactly. Yeah, you're just like, I want something else.
Yeah, I want something
Um,
more.
yeah. What
So you know what that brought to mind?
mm,
If that is the case with a town, and maybe this is why it applied to me so strongly, even though, I'll counter my own point that I'm about to make and say that I always wanted to be it anyway.
mhm,
But in Grand Cache, with that boundary wrapped all around you, and that's you're stuck in that petri dish, that's ripe for recruiting.
mhm,
When a kid just wants to get out,
yeah,
whatever out means. They don't even know what out is, but they just want out of it.
yeah. There's a really great corollary into life in general. If you're in a rut, you're in a hole, you're in a position that has not changed in decades, and this is just the life that you live now, and you're like, yeah, well, I mean, I just wish I could get out of this cycle. I wish I could get out of this sequence. I wish I could stop doing whatever it is you're doing. You got to get out. You got to get like out. It's not enough to just drive to the border and like look over and like, oh, look at that town. That looks nice. And then go back inside. You have to leave completely. And that means sometimes you got to cut ties. That means sometimes you're not going to see people anymore. That means sometimes you're not going to do things that you always did anymore. But in order to get to that next area, you have to do that. You have to
Yeah, so
separate that.
y y I agree with you academically, but I don't agree with you based on my observation of how the real world is spinning right now. So, in the mid 70s and whatever the mid 80s in rural Alberta, maybe someone wanted to get out.
Hmm.
I just gotta get out of I can't look at that wheat grain silo one more day. They just want to get out.
Yep.
And so back then, the appeal of recruiting of the military, as an example, to me, it represented adventure.
Yeah.
It represented something different. It represented something challenging. It represented something exciting, something new, something to solve. That's what it represented, and many
Hmm.
other things, of course.
Yeah.
Do you know where a person can get all of that nowadays?
The interwebs.
A video game.
Mm.
From about the time of 11 until the time you're in high school and all the way through to the time you graduate. You're bored with your town. You just slip into the video town.
Good point.
You,
Yeah.
you, you need an adventure. You just go and kill another guy in Call of Duty. You want some excitement? You re-up your grenades before you throw them in the video game. And so, the appeal or the attraction or the things that would have dragged a young man out of rural Alberta in the 70s, 80s, even the 90s, now it can be replaced by the metaverse.
That's true. And especially video games now are a whole it's a whole nother challenge because they are
Holy.
not only are they realistic, like looking, but they present you with issues that you would not see normally,
Well, that's
right? Like
right.
you get to play as the special forces dude that needs to escape this thing and drive down the streets and shoot up towns and it's the action movie fantasy, and
Yeah,
it
or conversely, and I saw this because I don't play I don't play any of them. Um, so I saw kind of a walkthrough or a playthrough of one of these Call of Duty games. I think it was
Mhm.
one of the more recent ones, and it was precisely the what you just described. And it was some special operations guys. They're landing in a plane. They're coming off the back of the plane. They're shooting things up. They're doing this. You know, there's parachutes in the air. There's flares going off, and
Yeah,
blah blah blah. Or you can choose the other side. Yeah, I want to
yeah,
be the Russian Spetsnaz guy fighting against the American special operations guys that are landing. So you get two roles to play.
yep.
And here's where it gets weird, in my opinion. So a, a kid who is bored, wants some adventure, disappears into the Call of Duty world, and now he's quote unquote fighting the good fight. He fights through all of that fight, and then he shrugs his shoulders and says, well, I need more adventure. Now I'm going to be the bad guy.
Hmm.
And now he's the bad guy doing the thing, fighting the good guys. And so where does the line get drawn? So from the age of 11 till the age of 18, now you're thinking like a Spetsnaz.
Yeah,
But how did that happen?
because the line becomes ambiguous.
It's so blurry.
Yeah, and it's funny because my relationship with video
Morally.
game, well, absolutely, and my relationship with video games is very different than it would be now. Like the relationship my kids have with video games is very different than what I had, because I grew up with the beginnings of video games. I got to grow and
Oh,
evolve
right.
as video games did. So the first video games I were playing was on Atari
Yeah, right.
back in the day, right?
Yeah, yeah. Do
The
you remember
one
which
stick,
one?
one button. I think the very first game we played was, I think it was Pitfall.
Hmm.
So, it's still an adventure game, but
Yeah, yeah.
the graphics were not anywhere
No.
good enough that you could be like, whoa, man, this is like real life. There was always a distinct line between the game and life.
Dude, I started on Pong.
Pong, that's a good one. I haven't played
Yeah.
that in many years.
Plug it right into your TV with a little
Yep.
rotary dial.
Yeah, that's
Pong, man.
old school.
Dude, I think it
Uh,
was like some original stuff.
eh, it was one of the originals, not the
Right.
original, but one of them.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I then got to grow up and I started playing, the Nintendo, and then I started playing the Super Nintendo, and then I was playing the Sega Genesis, and then I got to play the PlayStation. And I actually got, when I was working in a video game store while I was in junior high and high
That's
school,
right.
I saw the evolution. I watched the new systems come in and
Yeah, of
take over
course.
the old ones, and I watched the graphics get better, and I watched the gameplay get better, and the user interface became more complex, and the storylines had more depth to it. And it was actually quite interesting. There was a point where the graphics quality could be increased, but it would take up so much memory you wouldn't be able to
Mhm.
have a depth
Yeah,
of
yeah.
story. And that was the tipping point. Was once the graphics became so complex that they were taking more memory than the story could handle, the games became shorter.
Yeah.
And it became more thrilling and more flashy and more like it's all about now, 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 now. Whereas the
And
games
then
that
the cloud showed up,
and then the
and now
cloud
there
showed up.
are no limitations.
Exactly.
Now it can be
Especially
long and fancy.
with VR, it adds a
Mhm.
whole new level.
Yeah, for sure.
And actually, I follow some dudes on social media that they're like, they're U.S. or former U.S. Special Forces
Mm.
that now do VR gaming. I mean, we had Taylor on here that has
That's
the
right.
whole VR setup, right?
Mhm.
But some of the new games that are coming out are really accurate,
Mm.
and you actually have to do the motions when you're doing reloads. You have
Oh,
to
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
physically be inside the game, which changes things even more because the line is getting. You talking about the moral line. Now the actual visual line is starting to get blurry, and
Yep.
now you have a moral and visual ambiguity that starts to lean into the realm of fantasy
Yeah.
versus reality, and that's a whole nother.
So now you've got an 11-year-old who's developing skills, like
Mhm.
real world skills of
Mhm.
changing mags and etc. And now he's bored. and now he wants to be Spetsnaz.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and where does his little peanut go? You know, it's not clear
Yeah.
that he's on a righteous path at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he will remain righteous, but it won't be easy to stay righteous if every waking second is being influenced negatively with a storyline that is not appropriate for an 11-year-old. And
Absolutely.
so here's what we did in our household. Like at the age of 11, I think the boys got 1 hour of gaming per week.
Oh, wow.
Use it wisely.
Yeah.
And so if in fact they will call it quote unquote screwed up, all right, maybe next week you'll appreciate your hour, because this
Mm-hmm.
week it's gone.
Yeah.
And so we always stated that computer gaming time was a privilege,
Yeah.
not a given.
It is a
And
luxury for sure.
so it kind of sucked for our boys in a sense, because all of their peers, as they grew up, all their peers just got free flow, baby. They're all about that Call of Duty and being a Spetsnaz.
Mm-hmm.
And our boys did not. It went from 1 hour to 3 hours a week. And then, I mean, it's only just, within the last couple of years that they now have almost a free and clear, do whatever you want in the sense of gaming. But right through the majority of high school, it was a controlled substance for good reason.
And I think control on it is good, because again, my experience was very different than what's going on now. And when I was young, I was looking at it as, gaming was a benefit, because I was actually learning and practicing things like hand-eye coordination, like problem solving, like I'm trying to draw out a blank right now, but there were positive sides to gaming. But we didn't have the moral ambiguity, right? There was always the hero story. It was always the the underdog story. It was always the fight against. And there were a couple. I remember there were a couple video games that we brought home that my mom was like, "No, you will not play this." And we were like, "But why?" And they're like, "It's not appropriate." And
Yeah,
then we
and
were allowed to play.
so let's pretend for a moment that those weren't appropriate.
Mhm.
But who's deciding what is appropriate? You? Your mom, who isn't playing the video game, just
Yeah.
looking at the cover and thinking, "Oh, that's not appropriate. There's hookers on the front of this video game. That's not appropriate. You're
Yeah.
not playing that game. You can
Mhm.
play that game, though," that
Mhm.
she's never seen.
Yeah.
And so who's deciding? If the parent isn't deciding, we all know that the kid doesn't care. They're going to be
Yeah.
all about the juicy stuff. And so here's what's happening at that point. You're being shaped by an institution that is shaping you, and you don't know how it's shaping you.
Mhm.
Whatever Ubisoft or whatever game company, it doesn't matter. You're being programmed by someone that you'll never meet, and you don't know how you're being programmed.
Yeah. And this is the real, I think, the touchy subject in all of that is that at some point, probably very soon, there's going to be the ability to plug in to a game and completely separate your consciousness into a game
For
versus
sure.
reality. And it's going to happen very shortly. I have no doubt.
In our
And
lifetime, for sure.
for sure. And once that happens, there will be people that will not want to leave the video game, first off. There will also be people that will use that video game to push an agenda. There could be lots of people, lots of different
For sure.
agendas being pushed left, right, and center. But then on top of it, you're also going to be haphazardly shaping other people through your actions without any thought whatsoever.
Correct.
And that is a hugely amoral system, I believe, because
It
it's
will be.
anarchy. It's just anarchy at that point. It's
It'll be a
survival.
problem.
Yeah. So
So,
the real
so
question.
what to do about it? Here it comes, and there's no stopping it, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So what you can do is raise your freaking kids to be smarter.
Yeah. I think the best way to do that also is to make them be accountable for their actions. It's very hard, but it is the most, I think, most accurate system. So when my boys yesterday, my son woke up He didn't really wake up. He fought us tooth and nail, getting out of bed, getting dressed, getting food, getting ready for school, getting out the door, getting in the
What,
vehicle.
like oppositional defiance or?
Oh, just straight. Yeah. Didn't matter what it was.
Okay.
He was not into it.
Right.
And we slowly worked through. Eventually we got him to school, and along the way we were like, okay, just so you know, this amount of difficulty equals 0 video games, period.
This year.
I didn't go that far.
I would. No
And
problem.
I'm sure you would.
Yeah.
We said for the day, because this was the first time I'd actually brought it up.
Oh, okay, fair
So
enough.
I wanted to make sure that he was like, you need to understand this. And he was upset. Like, he was really, it added to the obstructions of trying to get through the day,
Perfect.
obviously, which is exactly what it
Yeah.
should have.
Perfect.
And this morning, or sorry, later last night, he was like, can I go on my tablet? I'm done on my homework. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
We've already established that this was not happening today. And he had a little breakdown in the moment. I was like, this is the
Go get your iPad. Bring it to me. And the garbage can.
Yeah.
Bring it to me.
Mhm.
Make a choice. Do you want me to throw it in the garbage right now, or do you want to get with the program?
Yep.
I've done it.
Yeah, and that's the accountability piece, right? If you allow your children to do something, they have to understand that there is consequences to actions. Period. If
Yeah, they need
don't
to know the
understand
boundaries.
consequences, yes.
There's a line in the sand, and if you
Yep.
cross it, there will be outcome.
And then once the outcome happens, you have to stick to it.
Oh, dude.
Right?
And that's where the weak parenting comes in.
Yeah.
It's oh, my life would be so much easier if I just folded on this moment. Fold.
Mhm. Yep. Or I just need 10 minutes alone. Fold. Right? I
Yep.
just need whatever.
And line up the excuses
Yep.
to weak parenting.
Yep. It's happened to me a couple times. There's been days where I just was not capable of managing, and I folded. And yet now, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, like, weren't capable. What does that even mean? What if there were no iPads in the world?
And that's a great. I had the excuse.
There is no excuse.
No. The tablet is the excuse.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, I see. Yeah.
I had the ready-made. I need time to do whatever. I can't, like, right here. And it becomes the excuse. It becomes the out.
It's a lie that you tell yourself.
It is 100% a lie that I tell myself. And I don't do that anymore. And now when there's a line. And actually, it's funny, my uncle gave me this advice too when when Arden was first born. And he gave me 2 pieces of advice. One was sleep when you can. And the first one was sleep when you can and read what you want, because they're babies and they don't know.
Oh, right.
So,
yeah.
like, at the end of the night, you could read. He used to read his kids McLean's magazine, just because, like, he had it and he would just read it to them and they would go to sleep.
And you were reading your kids video gaming manuals.
I was not, no. But the second piece of advice, he said, never threaten something that you will not come through with.
Oh, right.
Because they'll see through it in a heartbeat.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Push that button
Always.
every day of the week.
Yeah. Give an inch, take a mile.
And that's it. So I've been working on that over the last number of years, making sure that when I threaten something, it happens. And there have been massive freakouts, and there have been massive fall down crying things, and I just like, I told you, man, like, it was laid out in front of you. You don't do this, I'm gonna throw this out. You didn't do it. Garbage. Now it's gone. Now what? And he'll roll around the floor and cry for a little while, and you're like,
see you next year.
Okay. This is where we're at now. And eventually that crying subsides, that screaming subsides, that anger subsides.
Because they'll get dehydrated and pass out.
One of my favorite moments, still to this day, and it's happened with both my boys, and I'm sure it's happened with your boys, when they have just like an absolute meltdown and start screaming and they just stomp off to their room and throw themselves on the bed and they cry and they scream for about 15 minutes and they fall asleep. And you're like, okay, they'll be more manageable when they wake up. We're gonna give them an hour.
My boys didn't do that.
No,
I just didn't let that fly, because 15 minutes turns into 20 minutes. Then it turns into 20 days. Then it turns into 20 years. It's a slippery slope. It's a
Mm.
non-starter.
Okay.
That's it. That's all. You're not going to have a little moment where you get to run your own little moment. That
Mm.
you'll explain to me what's going on, and then we'll figure it out. But this is not we're not this is not a drama, man.
Yeah.
This we're not creating a Hollywood movie revolving around junior drama. And I think kids need to understand that from a very early age.
Yeah.
Otherwise, where does it end? How long do you let it manifest? Another 3 years? 4 years? Entrenched?
Yeah. I limit the amount of time the freak out happens. So as they get older, the amount of time that I allow for freak out becomes smaller. So when like Kinley is 5 now, I think I give
Mm,
him 2 or 3 minutes
mm.
to like freak out. And then I'll go in and I will
Why give
move
him
him.
any time at all?
I see, and I
Now,
give him
listen,
time.
maybe there's therapists out there or psychiatrists or, someone who's like got 47 PhDs who right now is blowing their top because I'm saying maybe they're hearing me say that no kid should ever blah blah blah. I'm not saying that. Alls I'm challenging you with is how long is long enough
Yeah.
and why.
So the reason that I give them any time at all is because when I was young and I had a meltdown, I was confronted immediately. And in that moment, I could not think clearly because I was in the middle of a freak out. And all I ever wanted was a couple of minutes to just like let me focus on what to get outside of the emotion. And so that's what I do with my kids is that I'll give them a couple of minutes to freak out, and then I will guide them through the emotional issue.
Mm.
And once they can realize that, oh, I'm having a reaction. Okay, now and then we can breathe and calm, and that's what I do. They'll have a freak out, and I'll kind of sit with them, and I'll just be like, "Hey, breathe, just breathe." And I'll give them a hug, especially when they're little. When Kinley's 3 and 4, and they were crying, and I would just hug them, and it's all good. When you're done,
Mhm.
like let's breathe,
Yeah, I got no
calm
issues with
yourself
that.
down, and then once they're calm, then we talk about it.
Mm.
And so I allow for the emotional response to like not so much sink in, but so that they realize that it's actually a response. So it's not I'm really mad and now I'm freaking out and now I'm getting yelled at or now I'm trying to make a logical leap to something else while I'm emotional and mad. So I allow the emotion to kind of happen and then they go, "Oh, wait. That's not helping." And then I bring what I wanted to teach them basically was to recognize that the emotional stimulus is under their control. And so I
Well, it
bring them,
is.
and it is, yeah.
And so how much do you let them get away with? How much do you let them set that ball in motion? And so the thing that comes to mind is, when a kid stomps off to their room and slams their door. That'll never happen again.
Mhm.
Don't ever slam that door again.
Yes.
If you're angry, whatever, but don't
Yep.
be slamming doors.
Yep.
Because if you give it an inch, it'll be a mile.
Yep.
And a year later, 4 years later, 7 years later, whatever, it's all about the drama and the door slamming and the huffs and the puffs and the woe is me and the center of the universe. Everyone's supposed to revolve around me, not me interact with it.
Yeah.
And now it's a door slamming mentality.
Yep. And then a door slam becomes a broken TV or something thrown against the
Yeah,
wall
for
or a
sure.
broken window
Lashing
or
out.
whatever, right? And
No
that's where
emotional control.
for me, I like to as they have gotten older, my standards have increased for what their behavior should be.
Hmm.
So as they're young, I kind of allow for more, I give them more of a buffer zone, and as they get older, that buffer zone starts to shrink because their
So
responsibilities are
my point
increasing.
is this, that the whatever you're allowing your dude, I ain't their parent.
Mhm.
You're their parent, and you're doing a better job than I am. I'm just armchair quarterbacking, which
For sure.
is totally dumb. But like it. I would say that you got to be careful on what you choose to allow to happen. So let's pretend one of the kids is having a 15-minute meltdown in the room, and they precede that meltdown with a good old door slam.
Mm.
And they slam the door, and you're like, oh, he's just having a moment. I'm going to give him 15 minutes to tear the room apart, or whatever. And so now it's a year and a half of door slamming. At what point do you say, all right, no more door slamming? They've been that's part of their process now.
Yeah.
So you've got to ascertain right from the get-go, before the first door slam or the first whatever, how much of that you're going to allow on those initiation moments.
Oh, for sure.
Because the moment that you let it happen, now it's a thing.
Yeah.
Now it's going to get done every single time.
And yeah, Arden, I think when he was about 5 or 6, tried the door slamming once. And that never happened again.
Nor should it.
It was that was a immediate reaction for me. That was
nor should it.
Absolutely nothing. And then there was something I noticed that I was doing that he was not reciprocating, but duplicating.
Mimicking, yeah.
And when I would get angry or something, and whether I had something in my hand, I would get really, really angry, and I would throw something.
Oh yeah.
And
jackass.
I know, right? It was. And at the time, I did not have as great a control of my own emotions as I do now. And so I had let that anger take over. I let that emotional response just lash out.
You lost it.
I did. And at one point, I threw a piece of Lego that I sat on, and I was already upset. And I just let it take over. And I grabbed that Lego piece and I whipped it, and it bounced off the couch.
I'm going to teach you a lesson, inanimate object.
And it bounced off the couch and went straight into the TV. And
did it break it?
Oh yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You loser.
And that's the thing. I was just like, I cannot believe I let myself do that.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. And that was, again, one of those points where I can look back on and go, that was where I recognized I needed to control my anger.
Oh yeah.
And then I saw Arden do it once, and I was like, no, we're not doing that. I'm not doing it.
No, you will not copy me.
Well, that was the thing. I talked to him specifically about it. I'm
Right.
like, I know you saw me do it.
Yeah,
I was wrong.
I
was wrong.
Perfect.
We're not doing that anymore.
Right.
And that's where I a lot of times when I see my boys do something that upsets me, it's usually because I'm doing it.
Right.
Because they're just learning from their surroundings.
They're a reflection of you, pal.
So when I talk to them and I say something like, hey man, we cannot shut down. When things are going bad, we can't just shut down. We have to keep moving forward. I use the term we because I'm in it too, and I'm still learning, and I'm still engaging, and I'm still developing my skill sets. So, and I've had this conversation with them a couple of times where I've said, you know what? I'm learning all this stuff now when I'm 40, right? Like, do you want to be 40 and start learning it, or do you want to figure it out, or at least have help figuring it out right now? And then he'll go, well, I think it'd be better not to do this stuff when I'm 40. I'm like,
another way that you could do it, again, stupid armchair quarterbacking parenting.
Any
Dude,
help?
I could be way off base. But one way that you could do it, and you've kind of said the we, which is a great approach, but hit them with that, make them own it, ownership, extreme ownership. Boys, how can we do this better? What are your ideas?
That's a good idea.
Ask them to solve their own goofy little stormy problems.
Yeah.
And another way that you could do it is, again, leadership by example. Talk to them how, when you get angry, we'll say, or you could use it as a academic conversation, perhaps. When I used to get angry, here's what I would do. And you can like role play that out for them. Like, you can stomp off to your room and slam the door or whatever you used to do. I don't know, whatever bad habits you picked up. And show them that's what I used to do. And boys, do you think that's appropriate? How could I have done that better? Have them solve the problem. Have them take ownership of how to do it better themselves as part of that we team.
Yeah, that's a great. And I actually used that just recently. They've been bickering with each other, as siblings.
As they do. Yeah.
And I was getting fed up, and I was like, okay, boys, we're not doing this anymore. You guys want to keep fighting? You're going to start losing stuff. And they were fighting over toys, and they were fighting over this and that and the other thing. And I was like, okay, so this toy is now gone. bye-bye. So how do you think, do you guys want this back? And they said yes. I'm like, okay. How do
Too
you want
late.
to? Well, I said,
Too
like,
late.
what do you think you would need to do in order to get it back? And they both sat there for a second. They didn't really know how to answer. And it was actually Kinley that came up with this, the young one. He was like, what if we had 2 days in a row where we weren't fighting? And I was like,
Cool.
I'm okay with that. All right, you guys can do 2 days without fighting, like zero fight. Not with me, not with you guys, not with mom, nobody. I'll give this back. And I put it up on top of the fridge, and I was like,
In 2
so
days.
in 2 days.
Okay. Good.
And so, I put it up on the fridge so they could see it.
Hmm.
And it just sat there until, and it was about a week before they got it back
Hmm.
because they needed 2 days in a row. That was the challenge.
Right.
And then once they had it, I was like, okay, cool. You can have it back. Understand that it gets worse next time, right? It's not 2 days. We'll figure it out then. And they have not gotten into that situation again. And I just as you said, I gave them the ownership of the problem. They're going to fight over something. It's going to be up to you to solve it. And they solved it, and then they got it back. So I think that works really well, and it's something that I'm adding to my repertoire as a dad.
I've done it myself when the boys have screwed up, and I've looked at them and said, okay, there's consequences. Choose them. And they have to come up with them. And then they have to own them. And that's the way it is.
Well, I think that's the best way to do it. Ownership is the easiest way to solve a problem. And let me rephrase that. It is not the easiest way to solve a problem. It is the most effective way to solve a problem.
It's a good way.
But it can be very challenging.
It can.
But it'll be worth it.
It's worth it, and it can be challenging, and it's made easier if you go through all of those video games in the garbage.
But I want to play them too. Come on.
That's right. Way to set a good example,
Right.
Burls.
Right. But again, everything is things are balanced, right? And you got to find that right balance for you, and you got to find that right balance that you can set your kids
Not
up
just
to be better.
You got to find the right balance for you and your family.
Yeah.
As you are leading by example.
That's exactly it. Everything you do is seen, and everything you do can be mimicked.
Oh, yeah.
And on that note, we're at about an hour here. And
yes, we are.
Man, great conversation. Good stuff on, childhood, understanding yourself, and all that. That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
My apologies to your boys who may hate on me for giving them the hard video love.
That's all good. The thing is, this is, as you said, I think a few episodes ago, being a kid nowadays is way harder than it is now than we were kids or when you were a kid.
It's harder and it's easier. It's just different. It's just a different context.
It is, and
it's easier for kids nowadays if they're being raised by good parents.
That's true. Yeah, and I think the conversation will continue because who knows what happens next, and who knows what's going to come down the pipe, and who knows what the next challenge is going to be. Especially,
dude, you didn't even ask me who I was when I was 12.
I didn't.
Can you imagine how long that conversation's going to take?
Oh my goodness! I don't even want to. 13 or 14, we're going to start getting into girls and stuff. Oh, jeez.
All right, we'll wrap. Oh,
only tuned in just now. Glad I caught the last 10 minutes though. Stimulating.
Cool.
Appreciate it. I'm glad y'all liked it. So if you haven't already, I mean you should have already, but make sure you like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. That way we can keep doing these every day. We're going to keep doing it every day, but make sure that you're notified so that you can stay in touch and you can learn and build and grow with us here on The Collective. We'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.
Oh no, I lost the button. There we go.